My name is Jeff Renew. I am the historian for the CCDC Armament Center at Picatinny Arsenal, New Jersey. This is The Women of Picatinny Arsenal from 1907 to 2018. Picatinny Arsenal publications, housed in the Historical Archive, tell the story of Picatinny women going back to the foundation of the arsenal. This includes newspapers, photo albums, employee notebooks, and quarterly production reports. An example of one of the types of articles from the newspaper can be seen on the right-hand side here from The Voice. This is when Secretary of the Army John Marsh announced that August 26th would be Women's Equality Day. This was the 64th anniversary of women being granted the right to vote. Let's start at the beginning. This is Marion Spargo. She started work on the 1st of April 1907 at Picatinny Arsenal for a temporary position at the new arsenal. She was the only woman in the headquarters office during the pre-World War I era. During the 1930s, she was part of the editing staff of the Picatinny Arsenal Barrage newspaper. By World War II, she became chief of the allotment section and represented the Picatinny workforce along with Raymond Spicer in receiving the Army-Navy E Award for Excellence in 1942. By 1947, she retired with 40 years of service at Picatinny Arsenal, spanning 2 world wars. Lenora Van Sickles started work in the sewing room at Picatinny Arsenal in 1907. She was just 15 years old. Besides sewing propellant bags, her duties included hikes to bring jugs of drinking water back to the sewing room and coal shed duty to retrieve fuel for the potbelly stove that was used as a source of heat. During World War I, she was an inspector traveling to ordnance plants in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Virginia to ensure propellant bags were manufactured properly. During the 1926 explosion, she lived across the street from the Lake Denmark depot. The blast caused her house to collapse. Her brother Alfred pulled her from the debris and took her to Wharton for treatment. In the 1930s, 30 of the 38 employees in the sewing room were female. During World War II, that number increased to 1,200. Lenora was the process inspection leader during the war. After 55 years, Lenora Van Sickles retired from Picatinny Arsenal in 1962. The propellant bag sewing section was reduced to 20 women with the introduction of automated sewing. This photo is from the July 17, 1942 issue of the Picatinny News. These are the women of the messenger department, gathered around a Civil War-era 6-pounder cannon in front of the Picatinny Arsenal headquarters. It was their job to escort visitors to their destination on the arsenal in order to avoid security breaches. A woman on the top right-hand corner is named Loretta Felfady. She was still working at Picatinny in 1987 and posted in the Picatinny Voice asking if anyone recognized the women in the photo. She provided her work phone number in the hopes of getting the group back together. 3 million women ordnance workers, or WOWs, worked in production plants across the United States during World War II. A 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week wartime work operation required more skilled workers. Picatinny Arsenal hired women to supplement the workforce. In January 1942, women comprised 20% of the workforce, but by 1943, that increased to 48%. In June of 1942, 100 women trained in Wing 1 of the Metal Components Branch. Helen Kishpaw, Tessie Henschel, and Margaret Corey, the drill press operators pictured left, increased production 20% over the men they replaced. WOWs wore bandanas like the one pictured here, with the Ordnance Flaming Bomb emblem on it. This was necessary for safety, to keep hair out of machinery and prevent powder or explosive materials from getting into it. Women made up a significant percentage of the ordnance inspectors during the war. The Fuse Component Inspection Division was nearly 80% female. Notice the nail polish on the inspector using the profile gauge in the upper left photo. Danger to the Axis, Women at Work. This 1943 Picatinny News article series featured the work that women were doing at Picatinny Arsenal to support the war effort. On the left, April 2nd, 1943, you can see Florence Ciani and May Jeffers getting their tools from the operator's crib. Mary Jane operates a lathe and Ruby McQuaid preps tubing for soldering. You can also see Verlie-Ann Hirschman at work, Picatinny Arsenal's first female welder. On the right, April 30th, 1943, you see the women of the Metal Components branch. There were 35 before Pearl Harbor and 538 at the time of this article. The photos were taken in buildings 22 and 24. Elizabeth Leuenberger operates a punch press to make fuse cups. Ann Williams, Antoinette DeMora, and Vicky Duder construct fuse metal parts assemblies. Edna Zadek operates an automatic screw machine. May Holt performs a staking operation. Alice Moore runs a turret lathe to make fuse rotors, and Dorothy Manny inspects the work to make sure that everything is made to spec. There were many Picatinny firsts and prominent women during World War II. Our first female physician was Dr. Mary McManamy. First psychiatrist, Dr. Evelyn Ivy. Our first female photographer was Brett Stewart. The foreman of the propellant bag cutting section was Annie Taylor. The chief of the Administrative Division Technical Group Auxiliary was Julia Burns. Earlier, you met our first female welder, Verlie-Ann Hirschman, the chief of the allotment section, Marion Spargo, and our process inspection leader for propellant bags, Lenora Van Sickles. Hirschman, Spargo, Van Sickles, and Burns were all World War I Picatinny alumni. In 1942, over 20 years before NASA, two African American women proved that they could do science and math just as well as any man. Genevieve Jones was a pharmaceutical chemist. She practiced pharmacy for 2 years before working at Picatinny. Marion Tanner had a Bachelor of Science from Wilberforce University and was awarded a scholarship at the University of Pittsburgh. Both women started work at Picatinny as classified laborers. They were soon transferred to the Explosives Research Department due to their advanced education and previous scientific experience. They were the first female and African American chemists at Picatinny Arsenal to work in the explosives branch in research and development. This Picatinny News article showcases 5 women working at Picatinny Arsenal while their husbands were fighting in the war. Mary Moran worked in parachute assembly in Building 732 while her husband Charles was drafted into the Army. Evelyn Mitchell was a production worker in Building 717. Her husband James was drafted into the Army, and he previously worked in Building 732 on the Arsenal. Catherine Woodruff was also a production worker in 717. Both her husband and her brother were drafted into the Army. Helen Kissack was in shell loading. Her husband Joseph was also drafted into the Army. Anna Bell was a production worker, and her husband worked for the Hercules plant before becoming an artilleryman in the Army. Another Picatinny News article featured Philomena Cesare, an employee of the Picatinny Arsenal powder bag facility. She had 4 brothers in the armed services, and she considered herself as the 5th member by helping them out through production. This is Anne Hollis. Her connection to Picatinny Arsenal goes back to the day of her birth, July 10th, 1926, the day of the Lake Denmark Depot explosion. Her family lived just outside of the Mount Hope Gate, and her father worked for the Mount Hope mines. During the early 1930s, her brother, who was only about 13 years old, used to take her father's car, and they would drive on to Picatinny Arsenal and around the flagpole in front of headquarters. Anne's career at Picatinny started in 1944 when she worked on Saturdays during the senior year of high school. In 1945, after graduation, she worked full-time in the procurement office. During World War II, she stated that price was not an issue and that procurement was schedule-driven. During the 1950s, she worked on procurement for the Army Ballistic Missile Agency, which was headed by Wernher von Braun prior to the establishment of NASA. The ABMA developed the Redstone and Jupiter rockets and the Pershing missile. Anne retired from Picatinny Arsenal after 33 years, starting as a clerk typist and ending as a procurement supervisor. These are excerpts from the notebook of Wilhelmine Weilich, a draftsperson at Picatinny Arsenal in 1943. This is what I like to call an eBay rescue. We found her notebook on eBay and were able to purchase it and add it to our archive. This notebook was for training in mechanical drawing and drafting and is dated to February to April 1943. This notebook contains training in dimensioning and tolerancing, basic mechanical drawing, drill and tap and counterbore, gauge design for go-no-go gauges, machining of various materials, tool making, and advanced drawing for ammunition. After World War II, we see some changing and diverse attitudes towards women in the workforce. In 1952, the Inquiring Photographer column in the Picatinny News asks the question, "How do you feel about working under the supervision of a woman?" Rosalie Caggiano says she definitely wouldn't like it, stating that women in authority assume a superior attitude and are difficult to get along with, and that women belong by the sink. Lucy Albensi Ruiz, who grew up on Mount Hope Ave in Rockaway and was the sister of Captain Joe Albensi of the Rockaway Township Police, says that she finds it pleasant, and she doesn't think that women bosses can be fooled as easily as men supervisors. Armand Forte says that working for a woman is pretty much the same as working for a man. The only thing that's important is whether she knows her job. Helen Vanderbilt was the first woman at Picatinny Arsenal to transition from clerical work to engineering. She started in 1916 as a clerk, and by World War II she was head of both the personnel and the mail records sections on the Arsenal. Her interaction with the engineers during the war encouraged her to pursue a degree in engineering. And after World War II ended, she did just that and earned an engineering degree at Rutgers Extension Division. During the Korean War, she was the only female engineer in the Industrial Division at Picatinny. She developed an illumination artillery shell and provided engineering support for propellants, pyrotechnics, rockets, artillery, and bomb fuses. In the days before computer-aided design and 3D graphics, technical drawings were done by hand by illustrators, and that's exactly what Alice Sheridan did. She started work at Picatinny Arsenal in 1950 as an illustrator and painted murals on building walls. She made illustrations of weapon systems and components. In 1955, she left Picatinny to start a family and returned again in the 1970s. She started as an illustrator again, then became a draftsman for the weapons division, and was promoted to GS-12 engineering technician. She retired in 2002 with a total of 27 years of government service at Picatinny Arsenal. The late 1950s through the 1970s were times of great change for Picatinny Arsenal. In 1959 through 1962, Picatinny became known as the Army Ordnance Special Weapons Command, or OSWAC. From 1962 through 1977, Picatinny was part of the Army Munitions Command, or MUCOM. Nancy Bauman was a chemical engineer with a degree from Bucknell University who worked at Picatinny Arsenal during this time. She was employed in the Feltman Research Labs at Picatinny in artillery ammunition and rocket development, as well as explosives and propellants. She was instrumental in the design and development of ignition systems for the 37mm propelling charge and the 106mm battalion anti-tank rifle. Nancy Bauman was also a member of the team that won the Picatinny Women's Bowling League Championship in 1960. She's pictured here on the right side of this photo from the Picatinny News. Colonel Clanderman, the commander of Picatinny Arsenal, presents the nurses of the dispensary with an award in 1962. Amelia Wright, the second nurse from the left, lived in the Ford Faish House, which was the home of the Iron Master during the Revolutionary War. She lived there in the half closest to the Mount Hope Road with her husband Ed and daughter Edwina. Mr. Wright ran the company store across the street, which is now the Tilcon Quarry. This information is courtesy of Anne MacDonald, who is a childhood friend of Edwina. Unfortunately, accidents happen in dangerous lines of work. Jenny Bales died in an accident in 1962 when a flare functioned during loading. She was a veteran of 26 years on the job in the loading branch at Picatinny Arsenal. Joyce Haley was a physicist at Picatinny Arsenal in 1963. She was a graduate of Hampton Institute, Virginia, and one of 4 students selected to study radioactive isotopes at the Oak Ridge Institute of Nuclear Studies. She worked in the Warheads and Special Projects Laboratory, the nuclear division at Picatinny. This photo is from an article from the Picatinny News about Joyce Haley being Miss United Negro College Fund. Equality for women was a major social topic of the 1970s, and Picatinny Arsenal was no stranger to it. Mrs. Sally Clements, the Assistant Secretary for Material Acquisition, visited Picatinny Arsenal to present Women in Top Management. She had recommendations for the women in the workforce who were aspiring for management positions. First was to examine your preferences, decide what you would like to do, and establish your goal. Second was to assess your qualifications, get education and professional training needed. Third, have perseverance and willingness to sacrifice a social and family life. And fourth, work, achieve, and don't let anyone push you around. She also spoke of barriers to advancement that were in place and the ways that you can make these barriers fall. The first barrier she spoke of was cultural conditioning. She stated, "Girls have not been encouraged for science. As children, girls are taught to be content with their toys, while boys are encouraged to take them apart and reconstruct them. Little girls are praised for looking pretty, and little boys are encouraged to think about their future." The second barrier was failure to educate the best and brightest female minds to their fullest potential, and failing to develop our educated women to the highest level of their ability to contribute. And third, the belief commonly held by employers that it is useless to hire women for jobs that lead to advancement because they will only leave when they get married or have a baby. On the 5th of November 1974, the Society of Women Engineers hosted a tour of Picatinny Arsenal for 60 female high school students to promote careers in engineering and science. Renee Stone, pictured on the left, was an aeronautical engineer at Picatinny. She had a Bachelor of Engineering from NYU and a Master of Business Administration from Fairleigh Dickinson. After 15 years of Picatinny service, she was awarded the Alumni Achievement Award from NYU, the highest award granted to graduates that have attained prominence and distinction in their chosen vocation or field of endeavor. The tour included Picatinny Arsenal Museum, the Explosives Environmental Testing Lab, and the machine shop. Inez Fluke was awarded the Decoration for Exceptional Civilian Service in 1974. She risked her life during an explosion. One employee was seriously injured and 10 others to a lesser extent. Her citation reads, Inez Fluke ignored the possibility of additional explosions in the immediate area and remained to comfort and administer aid to the most seriously injured employee. This was done without regard for her own safety and was an act of courage and bravery. Signed, Martin Hoffman, Secretary of the Army. Luella Ellington was a nuclear physicist at Picatinny Arsenal in 1976. She was the only woman amongst 15 men assigned to a 75-hour creative problem-solving session. During the first session, they improved the reliability of the fuse safe and arming circuit for the Pershing II missile. A second session was held at the request of Picatinny management to develop a concept for mine scattering. Her contribution was so significant that management ensured that more women were invited to all subsequent sessions. Maxine Bohacs, an electronics engineer in the Picatinny Arsenal Fuse Division, demonstrates the Superceptor computer in 1977. The Superceptor simulates digital circuits using free format or Fortran subroutines. In Picatinny firsts, the Superceptor is used to solve interdisciplinary problems applied to trajectory, detonators, electromechanical systems, and nonlinear accelerometers. The high-rate manufacturing mission at Picatinny Arsenal ended in 1977, but the research and development mission continued. From 1977 until 1983, Picatinny was known as the U.S. Army Armament Research and Development Command, or ARADCOM. Norma Jean Baylor was the first woman at ARADCOM to complete a 4-year machinist apprenticeship program. She worked as a secretary at Picatinny for 9 years before pursuing this technical field. She went on to become the first woman at Picatinny to conduct computer programming and manufacturing, which was applied to the fabrication of prototypes. The process was refined at Picatinny and implemented at manufacturing facilities for high-rate production later. During another Army reorganization, ARADCOM became known as the Armament Research and Development Center, or ARDEC, in 1983. Natalie Chuko was a mechanical engineer with ARDEC. She worked as a design engineer for the Large Caliber Weapon System Laboratory at Picatinny. She was selected for a program called the Design Engineers Field Experience with Soldiers, or DFUSE. This program allowed her to go into the field with the artillery units at Fort Polk during training exercises. During the exercises, she operated an M110A2 howitzer that she provided engineering support for at Picatinny. She gained a greater understanding of the use of the weapon system, and the experience led to product design improvements to correct issues and difficulties she personally encountered during the exercise. Captain Mary Graham was the chief of the Large Caliber Weapons section of the ARDEC Explosive Ordnance Disposal Unit. She was the first woman in the United States Army to earn a Master EOD badge. She served in Germany, Edgewood, Maryland, and at Picatinny Arsenal. She answered many calls in New Jersey to disarm suspected dangerous explosive devices. One call, in a domestic dispute, the husband threatened to blow up his house. It turned out to be a legitimate threat. She's quoted, "We are an R&D organization that develops, writes, and publishes render-safe and disposal procedures for all Army and foreign ordnance that has a counterpart in the Army. If the Army develops new ordnance, we develop new render-safe procedures, and we develop the tools and equipment needed to render them safe." Ruth Nicolaides was a physicist at Picatinny Arsenal. She developed and constructed the Army's first scanning tunneling microscope, which was used to inspect surface features of integrated circuits at a magnification of 100 million times. In comparison, a visible light microscope only magnifies up to 1,000 times. She collaborated with the physics department of Notre Dame University to design and build her STM. After establishing the first Army STM at Picatinny, she instructed other Army labs in constructing additional STMs at their own facilities. She was the president of the Picatinny Arsenal chapter of the Sigma Xi Scientific Research Society. During the Gulf War, the Picatinny Arsenal chapter of the federally employed women collected items to send to soldiers in Saudi Arabia. This included things like chapstick and cookies, and generally things that we take for granted every day here. The president of the federally employed women Picatinny chapter, Irene Sweely, said, "Many of these servicemen and women have no family, and receiving some of these articles will show our support and concern for those overseas." During Desert Storm, the materials engineers like Stacy Kerwin and Linda Moreland conducted tests and analyzed data to ensure that our systems worked properly in the harsh environmental conditions encountered in Southwest Asia. Vivian Deeds was one of the first female GS-15s at Picatinny Arsenal. She started in 1954 as a GS-2 clerk typist. She was promoted to GS-9 program assistant in 1966 when Picatinny was known as MUCOM. She earned a diploma from the Logistics Management Center and was the first woman from Picatinny Arsenal to complete the Program Management Development course in 1978. That same year, she was promoted to a Program Analyst GS-11 in PM Cause. She was promoted again to GS-12 in 1981 in the Program Support Division of PM TMAS. She was promoted in 1984 and again in 1988 to GS-14 to be the Chief of the Program Management Office in PM TMAS. She was finally promoted to GS-15 in 1992 as the Business Manager of PM AFAS. Vivian Deeds was instrumental in managing ammunition for the M1 Abrams main battle tank during the Gulf War. This proved to be a decisive factor in ensuring U.S. forces dominated the battlefield. Pam Ferlazzo is a supervisor general engineer at Picatinny Arsenal. She has executed 18 different assignments since 1986. In 1987, she was a safety engineer. 1988, she worked in the Ammunition Maintenance Division, working on malfunction investigations. 1991, she was in the Mortar Systems Engineering Office. 1994, she was an Executive Fellow. In 1995, she worked on lightweight howitzers. 1998, she became a project manager in the PM Mortars Office. 2001, she worked Spider Mines. 2004, in mine neutralization. 2006, in mines and countermines. 2008, in munitions sensors and submunitions. 2009, she was the Associate for Production and Sustainment. In 2010, she was an idea catalyst and design advocate. And since 2011, she has been a supervisory general engineer. Some observations. Pam states that the working level of science and technology has a balanced equal footing for women, but percentage-wise, management is still dominated by men. Advice: take advantage of opportunities that present themselves, such as experiential and rotational assignments. Gaining a broader view of the organization improves your chance of achieving a management position. Dr. Dion Serbin was a graduate of the New Jersey Institute of Technology's College of Engineering. Her career at Picatinny Arsenal began in 1989 as a GS-7 with the U.S. Army Armament Munitions Chemical Command, Armament Research Development and Engineering Center as an artillery engineer on 155mm programs. In 1991, Dr. Serbin received the Operation Desert Storm Award for supporting American troops in the First Gulf War. In 1995, she earned a Master in Business Administration from Seton Hall University and was the first African American president of the federally employed women Picatinny Arsenal chapter. In 1998, she left the U.S. government for a career in telecommunications, but in 2003, Dr. Serban returned to the U.S. Army Arctic as an engineer in the Quality Engineering and Systems Assurance Directorate, supporting 60mm and 81mm mortar systems. In 2004, Dr. Serban was promoted to a GS-13 Program Management Engineer for the U.S. Army Program Executive Office Ammunition, Project Manager, Maneuver Ammunition Systems. In 2006, Dr. Serban was promoted to an NH-4 as a Project Management Officer in PEO Ammo. In 2007, Dr. Serban left the Army side of Picatinny but joined the Navy side in the U.S. Naval Sea Systems Command, Dahlgren Detachment, as the Deputy Program Manager of PM Navy Conventional Ammunition Systems. As of 2018, Dr. Serban was supporting medium caliber ammunition for the Naval Surface Warfare Center Indian Head Explosive Ordnance Technology Division. Barbara Maychek was the director of the U.S. Army Armament Research, Development, and Engineering Center from May to September of 2014. Prior to that position, she was the executive director of the Enterprise and Systems Integration Center from June of 2010 to May 2014. She provided oversight of Arctic research and development projects, managed strategic Arctic processes, and managed the Systems Engineering Office. She was the Associated Technical Director for Systems Concept and Technology from October 2003 to June 2010. She was the chair of the Arctic Science Board. She established and managed Science and Technology Advanced Technology Objective Projects, established and managed Science and Technology Advanced Technology Demonstration Processes, and managed all of the Arctic research development funding. Cynthia Perazzo is the Executive Director of the CCDC Armaments Center Weapons and Software Engineering Center. She was appointed to the Senior Executive Service 4th of April 2018. She was previously the Arctic Deputy Director of Technology, Chief of Strategic Technology Investment Office in May of 2011. She has a Bachelor of Science in Physics from New York State University, a Bachelor of Science in Engineering from the Catholic University of America, and a Master of Business Management from the Florida Institute of Technology. She was the recipient of the National Defense Industrial Association's Firepower Award in 2013. She is a member of the Women in Defense and chairwoman of the Arctic Diversity Advisory Council. Last but certainly not least, we have Anne MacDonald, who we lost in December of 2018. Anne was a Picatinny military wife. She was the daughter of William Struble, the second man on the Rockaway Township Police Department, when the department consisted of only 3 people responsible for the entire town. Anne organized Christmas parties for the Picatinny children. She was a dedicated member of the Picatinny Military and Civilians Club, and an active member of the Picatinny Arsenal Historical Society. She supported community activities and helped plan fundraisers. Anne provided a good amount of the background information about the Picatinny employees living in Mount Hope based on her own interactions to supplement the newspaper articles from our archive. We miss you, Anne, and we will never forget you. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the program. If you have any questions, please contact me. I'm Jeff Renew, the historian for the CCDC Armaments Center at Picatinny Arsenal, and here's my email address. Thank you very much.